Sometimes you come across a case that just screams injustice, and this case is one of them. When a 13-year-old girl disappears on her way to school one morning, the entire city should be out looking for her. Everyone should know she is missing, and everyone should know her face. If someone sees her, the police should be called immediately. But that isn't what happened in the case of Deniese Hiraman. Denise was just 13 years old when she vanished. 13 years old, barely a teenager, and still just a child. Denise left her home on the morning of August 27th, 1999, to walk to school for the day. Denise would not make it to school, and Denise would never be seen or heard from again. Where is Deniese Hiraman? Welcome back to the Where Are They podcast. Thank you all so much for the support of the show and for listening to this story of Deniese Hiraman. Unfortunately, it seems not enough people know of her case. Denise was born on October 6th, 1985. She was of Guyanese descent and lived in Queens, New York, specifically the part of town known as Little Guyana. Denise's family was from Guyana, a small country in South America, located just north of Brazil. Guyana is a country, or more accurately, a republic, and is made up of several nationalities, including Asian, Portuguese, Indian, and Native American. Denise's ancestry was mostly Asian, and Denise was a beautiful girl with dark hair and a bright, beaming smile. Denise lived with her family in Queens, New York, and Queens is one of the infamous 5 boroughs that make up New York City. Just to the west of Queens, you will find the East River, which separates Queens from Manhattan. To the east lies Long Island. Surrounding the area are several named bodies of water. In addition to the East River, you will also find the Long Island Sound and Jamaica Bay. Queens is also home to the JFK Airport and the popular neighborhoods of Flushing, Jamaica, and Forest Hills. In 1999, Denise had begun running with the wrong crowd. Despite being just 13 years old, Denise began smoking cigarettes. She began to dress suggestively and started doing her hair differently. She would even somehow get her hands on colored contact lenses just to change her eye color. She was known to put blonde or light-colored highlights in her dark hair or wear braided hair extensions. Unfortunately, there isn't much known about her home life at all. But I do wonder a lot about her home situation. For a girl at such a young age to be turning to such a lifestyle is both tragic and alarming. Little Guyana was a neighborhood that sat almost in the middle of Queens, stretching for about a mile. The Guyanese make up the 5th largest immigrant group in New York. And as a side note, if you are thinking you have heard about Guyana before, you might recall this as the infamous country where Jim Jones and his cult found themselves in the 1970s. It's an amazingly beautiful countryside, but also home to the unfortunate tragedy of the Jonestown horror. Little Guyana is a neighborhood full of friendly people, colorful storefronts and chutney music emanating from homes. Guyana is a mostly English-speaking country, so there really isn't a language barrier. However, there are a few different languages spoken there. There are some Guyanese dialects, generally a version of Hindu, that children are often taught for religious reasons. Denise was said to be fluent in both Guyanese and English. On the morning of August 27th, 1999, 13-year-old Denise woke up to get ready for school and headed out the door around 8 a.m. There was no mention of what school she was headed to, but a quick look at Google Maps does show a middle school about a mile from the center of Little Guyana. Denise was seen leaving her house that morning and heading down 115th Street. Somehow, Denise never made it to school that day. And it is completely unclear as to who reported her missing and exactly when that was. But what is clear is that at first, police listed her as a runaway and not much attention was put towards looking for Denise. So here is where I become the most frustrated. Denise's behavior leading up to her disappearance was that of a troubled teen. She had started smoking. Some have said she was trying hard to become a member of a gang, and she started dressing very suggestively. And I hate saying that in relation to a 13-year-old girl, but I want to mention it because in every single report talking about her case and Denise, it is mentioned. Denise had begun cutting holes in her clothing, and it was noted that she took care in doing just that. She would cut holes in her shorts, in her jeans, in her shirts. And she would often cut out shapes and designs and create patterns when doing that. And that part to me reminds me that she was still just a child. However, I'm sure people looked at all that behavior as that of a girl causing trouble and asking for attention. And it seems everyone just thought she had run away, and maybe she had. But to me, I imagine a little girl crying out silently for help and not getting it, especially at a time when she needed it the most. Now, August 27th had to be the beginning of the school year for Denise. In 1999, August 27th was a Friday, so it was most likely the end of possibly the first week of school. So did Denise just run off with her new friends on the streets? She no longer wanted to go to school? Or did something more sinister happen to her on the way to school? Maybe we are looking at a combination of both. Maybe she skipped school and ran into trouble after the fact. Police did complete a missing persons profile for Denise, and she was entered into the missing persons database. She was listed as a runaway. Now, the problem with her being listed as a runaway is her case really isn't given priority. And sure, law enforcement might spend a little time and put an officer in charge of her case, but with limited resources, they can only do so much. There were no signs of foul play, and police had nothing to go on. The media would also not pick up Denise's story, and there would be no media reports of her disappearance. Denise just walked out of the house, out to 115th Street, and vanished, leaving no trace. A few things, however, do come to light early on. As I already mentioned, there was talk that Denise was trying to join a gang, or may have already been associated with one. It's also made known that Denise had a couple of fake IDs showing her as age 18. The immediate theory is that Denise just walked away from her life and into a new life with possible gang members. The police did note in her file that they believed her to be alive and said she could possibly be in Minnesota, Ontario, Canada, or even Florida. But despite all my research, for the life of me, I could not find any mention as to why those locations in particular were noted. Did she know people in those states? Or was the crowd that she was hanging with at the time, did they have ties to those particular locations? So the runaway theory does have merit. But for some reason, in 2005, her case file is updated and the status was changed to endangered missing. And it could be that a regular review of her case caused that change, or because something was learned or something came to light regarding Denise. In any event, endangered missing status does catch the attention of law enforcement a little more proactively than just having her listed as a runaway. In 2005, there would be an interesting news report that would come to light when a house on 115th Street was roped off by investigators. A tip had come in alerting them that in the backyard of a home there, bones were discovered. So, sure enough, crime scene detectives do come out to that home and they do excavate a body. And at first, the body is unidentified. Cross referencing that body with missing persons in the area, the case of Deniese Hiraman does come up. Ultimately, it would be determined that that body had been buried in the backyard of that home since the 1970s and was that of a much older person, not Denise. Denise's missing person profile does confirm that they have a DNA sample on file, obviously likely from a relative, but they don't have any fingerprints or dental records on file for Denise. And what is unfortunate is that there is no information about her family at all. We don't know if she had any brothers or sisters, or what her home life was like, or if she had both parents at home. We just don't know any details at all. Now, in cases like this, I always look towards those that are closest to the missing person. But in this case, not only do we not know anything about her family, we really don't know anything about any possible friends. So it's really difficult to analyze her situation when there are no details or facts available. And I do have some inquiries out in the neighborhood, and if I ever get a hold of somebody who can provide more information, I will do an update episode immediately. And honestly, that is my goal with this case. Now, in 2005, when Denise's case finally gets an upgrade status in the system, it has already been 6 years. 6. And unfortunately, it almost feels like it's a little too late at that time. If she was a runaway and she hasn't come home or reached out yet, it is probably unlikely that she will. I think it's also possible that she began as a runaway and then maybe met with foul play after the fact, which is why to this day nobody has heard or seen Denise. Some quick runaway facts that explain why these type of cases receive a lot less attention in the beginning from law enforcement and the media. 74% of children aged 12 to 17 reported missing are runaways. Family-related abductions, where a family member takes the child, account for 7% of cases. Non-family abductions, stranger danger, make up less than 2% of all missing children's cases. And across the country, there are thousands of missing children's cases, which is really hard to believe. All of this information I found while reading through a study conducted by NISMART, the National Incidence Studies of Missing, Abducted, Runaway, and Throwaway Children. If you're curious about a throwaway child, that is when a child under the age of 18 is asked to leave the home without proper care being arranged for them. They are, in other words, kicked out of their home. I want to mention sex trafficking here too. Denise was a vulnerable age. Being rebellious and not knowing exactly what was going on at home, I wonder if she was calling out for attention. And all of that is the exact type of kids that are targets for sex trafficking. And I can't help but think about the possible gang connection too. There wasn't any additional information anywhere to support this or provide any more details, but it was mentioned in every single report of her disappearance. Did a local gang take advantage of her desire to become one of them and set her up to be trafficked? This feels like that could be a possibility in this case. So Denise disappears, and by all accounts, there was no media coverage, no volunteer searches conducted, no vigils held, pretty much nothing for this beautiful 13-year-old girl who was clearly feeling lost in life, who clearly needed guidance and love to help her. And the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children did do some age progressions up to the age of 18. But remember, Denise would be 36 years old as of this recording. And there's really just two theories that emerge in this case. Number 1, a runaway. Did she maybe travel to the areas of Minnesota, Florida, or Canada, as authorities had mentioned? Or theory number 2, was she kidnapped, possibly for sex trafficking? But that still leads to so many questions. Where is Deniese Hiraman? And where is her family to speak up on her behalf and ensure her case is being heard? Is it possible that her family was not fluent in English and the language barrier kept them from going to the press and doing what they possibly could have done? Is Denise still alive? Could she be living her life out there, either of her own free will or under the thumb of someone controlling her? Denise was just 13 years old when she disappeared. I am fully convinced that someone knows something, whether it was someone she went to school with or somebody in the neighborhood. Denise is described as Indian Asian with dark hair. Denise was 5'3" and 90 pounds at the time she vanished. She often went by the nicknames Pinky or Pinks. Denise has a round burn scar on her right forearm, and her ears are pierced multiple times each. What do you think happened to Deniese Hiraman? If you have any information on Deniese Hiraman, please contact the New York Police Department at 212 473 2042. When a 13-year-old girl vanishes, the world needs to know. Even though this happened 22 years ago, Denise and her family deserve some attention to this case. Please share her story, and as a reminder, I will be sharing photos of Denise as well. Let's do our part and do what we can. Thank you so much for listening to Denise's story. I know it's frustrating with the lack of details, but that doesn't mean this little girl doesn't deserve some attention as well. Thanks again for tuning in to Deniese Hiraman's story. We will see you again very soon, and until next time, stay safe and hug your loved ones.